How much is child allowance?
That, I'm afraid, I don't know. It's actually not a Department for Education policy. It's a DWP one, and I'm afraid I don't know the exact.
Sorry, is your title Minister? Is your title Minister for Children?
It is Minister for Children.
And
yes,
you don't know.
but
you don't know what the child allowance is.
Well, we don't run the benefits, I'm afraid. You're right. I should have found out before I came on here.
So I have to tell you, as the Minister for Children, Families and Wellbeing, what child allowance is. What sort of job do you think you're doing here, Minister?
Well, look, I'm sorry that I don't know the amount of it.
Astonishing.
Well,
I'll tell the listeners, because they won't need it. It's £25.60 for the first child and £16.95 for each additional child. I find it astonishing, I have to tell you, a government minister, that. OK, so we want to get folk into jobs. What's the current level of vacancies, Minister?
I think they've recently announced it. Is it not about 1.8 million, something like that?
Well, you're the employment minister, aren't you? You're talking about people getting into jobs and job opportunities. So what are the level of vacancies at the moment?
It's just above the number of unemployed people. And the important point about this, Nick, is that in some places we have huge numbers of vacancies. We want to create better jobs in places that don't have enough good jobs.
Yes, but what is the number of vacancies currently?
I think, forgive me, there was just an update recently, and it's just above the number of unemployed people that we have. It's around just over. So we have about 1.5 million people. You don't know. Who are unemployed. So
you're launching an initiative to get people back into work, and you don't know how many vacancies there are currently. Do you not think you should know that figure?
Forgive me.
It's 841,000. Let's end it there. But I do think possibly that is a number that you should know. You know how many people have dementia in this country, do you?
I don't have the number to hand, but I know it's a growing issue. But there's also lots of other people with other conditions that do need free personal care. And what Age UK has also said is that they think there's around 1 million people with an unmet care need. And as Liberals, we just say that's unfair. That's not a fair system. And particularly when you have big banks and big corporations raking in billions of pounds in profit, I think they should pay a little bit more to give us the public services that we need.
Yes, you don't lastly think, if you're talking about free personal care, it would have been an idea to know how many people have dementia in the country. You don't think that might have been an idea?
Well, I don't have that number to hand, but it's not just people who have dementia.
It's around 1 million people. And you've got... So just lastly, I mean, this is quite extraordinary. We're going to have 1,000 extra beds, 8,000 new GPs, up to 1 million people once they've passed testing that they will have free personal care, minimum wage for care workers, mental health counsellors in every state school, increased carers allowance, all through £9 billion a year.
Well, the mental health practitioner in every single school is not coming from that 9 billion figure, because that will be funded by tripling the digital services tax, which is a tax on the big tech companies. But our manifesto will be published later this morning. It's going to be fully costed, but be in no doubt we have big, bold ambitions, as you've just outlined, for how we fix our NHS and social care. And we'll be spending 9 billion on doing that.
You don't believe him now, do you?
Look, I mean...
Do you believe him now?
It's irrelevant.
No, it's not. Do you believe his story about Barnard Castle now?
No, I don't really know, because I think it turned out that it was, it was one of his family's birthday that day and blah, blah, fish cakes. But, that's...
So you were duped?
Look, I think that people have different strengths at different times in government.
Which was your greater lie? Lying about proroguing Parliament to the Queen, or lying to Parliament about the parties?
But so neither, because if you look at on the
Let me read you what Baroness Hale said,
Parliament. What I said in Parliament.
For what?
I don't think about parties in Number 10. Do you really think that people in Number 10...
Which was the greater lie? Lying to the Queen or lying to Parliament?
Since neither of them were a liar, there was no lie.
To the Queen, the effect of frustrating or preventing the ability of Parliament was unlawful, void, and should be quashed, said Baroness Hale.
And she was totally wrong.
You deliberately misled the House and did so repeatedly.
Yeah,
so which is the greater lie?
Because they were both neither. Because
you don't accept that you lied?
No, I certainly don't.
I remind you, back in 2017, you said... Then a Trump visit would be a validation of the views and statements of President Trump. Has your view changed? Would you welcome him?
This is a matter for the government and also for Parliament. And I think what's so important is that we continue continue to have what must be a crucial and important relationship, a good, positive relationship with President Trump.
No, but would you welcome him? Is my question.
Because look, that will be a matter for when he comes, if he is able to.
Well, no, it's a matter
when he comes
for you,
to the
Minister,
UK,
isn't it? The idea that I ask you whether you would welcome the incoming American president, you say it's a matter for someone else, or a matter for him, her, or Tom, Dick, or Harry. It's a matter, respectfully, for Seema Malhotra. Would you welcome President Trump?
It's a matter. Look, parliamentarians they welcome people coming from abroad
So
all
you
the
would
time,
welcome him
but
now?
but they look. It's a matter for the government about
it's a
whether he
matter for
comes, and I
Seema
think what
Malhotra,
is
isn't
really
it?
important.
Would you welcome him, Minister?
Look, I think in terms of President Trump, we've got to make sure that we have a strong working relationship, and I know that will continue, and I know the Prime Minister...
I'm coming around, I think, for the 6th time. Would you welcome him as an individual?
Yeah.
You would?
Yeah.
Some people might suggest it's going to get even more precarious in January when we have a return of Donald Trump. Do you still think he's a racist?
Listen, he is been elected by the American people. Our job now is to make sure that we're working with him, we're working with our European partners, we're working across the global stage. I have to say, one of the things I am so proud of this new Labour government is that Britain is back on the global stage, and we are leading and we are driving agendas.
The question,
and we will
Minister,
continue
was,
to do that.
Yes, do you think Donald Trump, do you still think Donald Trump is a racist? That was my actual question.
And we will continue to work with everyone in order to make sure that we are securing our security, but critically that we are doing the right thing for this country.
I've got that message, but my question is Donald Trump still a racist, Minister?
Listen, whatever my views, it doesn't matter. He's the president of the United States. He's been elected with a thumping mandate. And so our job is now to make sure that we are working with him, and we're working with our European allies, and we're working with others.
So you're happy to work with a racist, just to clarify. You're happy to work with a racist.
We will work with the US and all its institutions in order to make sure that we are doing the job of bolstering our security in a really, really precarious time. The one thing that this government cares about is boosting our economy, repairing our public services, delivering the change that people want. And we will work with countries across the world to do that.
Even if they're racist, led by racists.
And just to say, Nick, the most important thing now is that we are now leading. We've got a Prime Minister, we've got a top team that are out there on the international stage, and people are looking to us for leadership, and we will play that role.
OK. Do you regret using that language now, lastly, Minister?
I generally speak my mind. I'm a little bit of a John Prescott in that regard. But listen, we're in government. I will work with whoever we need to work for in the interest of this country. And we're not going to resolve from that. That is what people in this country expect us to do.
Do you think Donald Trump has KKK sympathies or Nazi sympathies, Mr. McFadden?
I think the relationship between Britain and America is really important, and I'm confident.
Well, that wasn't the question, though, was it, Pat?
Yeah, I know, and I don't want to get into all
so you think he might,
characteristics
then?
of people. Look, what I think is important is this friendship between the two countries.
I agree with you, sir, but you can't say he doesn't.
Well, I think there's another point that we shouldn't miss here, is that because of the timing of these two elections, both being within a few months of one another, we now know the character of the two governments on both sides of the Atlantic for the next 4 years. We're a newly elected government. He's a newly elected president. I think there's big possibilities here.
Okay. I mean,
and we look forward to working with him.
We will move on, but for the third time I will ask you, do you think he has Nazi or KKK sympathies? Pat McFadden, third time of asking.
I congratulate him on his win, and we look forward to working with him.
OK. It's just been published. Those comments were made in March. It's just been published. The Conservative Party accepted a £5 million donation from that man in May. Why would the Conservative Party take money from a man with clearly racist sentiments?
Well, I do not in any way, I absolutely distance myself from anything.
You were the former Health Secretary. No.
Nick,
but what does it say about the Conservative Party that they will take £5 million from a man who has such racist views? What does it say about the Conservative Party?
completely reject any of the comments that that individual is alleged to have made. I had nothing to do with fundraising in central office. What I do know is that we're in the middle of a leadership election, and the future of the Conservative Party is being debated now. I am sure that the candidates involved will have answers to this, and I very much hope and expect...
Do you think the £5 million should be returned?
Well, so it's not for me to get involved in party finances.
I mean, you were Health Secretary, goodness me, one of the main jobs. Do you think,
yes,
were your counsel sought by the new leader, would you tell him or her, I think we should send the £5 million back?
Well, I think what I do think is that fundraising in the future should be from a far wider base of people. You know, political parties cannot exist on air. No. We have to fundraise. The Labour Party rely on the trade unions, which is why they're giving their trade union masters a pay deal.
On businessmen with racist sentiments. So I just wonder whether that £5 million should go back.
I think one of the things we need to do looking forward is very much expanding our fundraising base, because I would much rather that we are a party of wide participation and wide fundraising than focusing on one or two individuals.
None of our plans require tax rises over and above the ones we've set out.
So you can say now there will not be an increase in council tax?
Look, Nick, what I'm not going to do is sit here 2 and a bit weeks before the election and write the budgets for the next 5 years. What I can say is that none of our plans require a tax rise, and that is for a reason, and the reason is our focus is on getting our economy going, on building, on growing, on raising living standards and creating wealth.
You're declining to take the opportunity to say that council tax will not increase. So I can put it to you that it will increase, and you can say I don't know.
Nick, it would be foolish to write 5 years worth of budgets before going through to 2029.
But you do realise, respectfully, every time you say we're not going to raise VAT, we're not going to raise it, and everybody says, what about council tax? You say, well, I honestly can't. You know what people are thinking. You're a bright bloke. Council tax will go up.
Yeah, well, let me...
Clearly it will.
No, Nick, that isn't our plan. No, Nick, none of our plans require a tax rise. Will it go up or when to go up, Sakir? None of our plans require a tax rise. No, Nick, because I do need to explain this.
I think you've had your time, respectfully. The comments from Paul Scully, no-go, one of your former senior colleagues, no-go zones in London. Do you support those?
No, I don't. I look very carefully, actually, at Paul Scully's words, and I think one phrase, one aspect of that has been taken. My personal view is no, that is not a London that I recognise. That is not a country that I recognise. Nick, I think we are blessed and lucky and fortunate to live in a country that is tolerant, a country that is respectful in the way that I deal with colleagues, in the way that I deal with my constituents, in fact, in the way that I deal with anyone. I think we are tolerant, we are respectful, and that's the way that I think we should be as a country.
So lastly, if we are tolerant and respectful, why was it necessary for Lee Anderson to have the whip suspended? Where was the tolerance there?
Well, Nick, respectfully, I think what Lee said was wrong. Yes. And as a result of what he said, he had the whip removed from him. That's robust action.
What was it specifically that meant the whip had to go? We agree it was wrong, but why was it wrong?
Nick, it was wrong. But why
was it wrong?
What he said was wrong. As a result of what he said, the whip was removed from him. That was robust action. That was robust action that was taken.
That's what I'm trying to get at.
It was wrong, Nick, because of what he said, and robust action was taken as a result.
You're well-educated. Let's try this a different way. Was it Islamophobic?
What he said was wrong, and robust action was taken, and the whip was removed within 24 hours.
Minister, was it Islamophobic?
Nick, it was wrong.
Minister, I'm going to, and I'm normally a very polite man, I'm actually going to effectively put the fact, I'll ask you now for the third time, I've asked you 6 times why it was necessary. For the third time, was it Islamophobic?
Nick, it was wrong.
I'll have to curtail the interview there. I'm grateful for your time, but enough already. Michael Tomlinson is the Minister of State for Illegal Migration, unable to answer a question. There seems to be concern that the Labour government would increase council tax. Can you say that is either true or false?
We have said there will be no council tax rebanding. We have made firm commitments, no increase in income tax, VAT, national insurance or corporation tax. There's nothing in our manifesto which requires additional taxes on working people.
So there will be no increase in council tax?
Look, we've been very clear on the tax, on income tax, VAT, national insurance, and there is nothing else in our manifesto that requires additional taxes on working people.
So, I'm sorry, we come around in circles. Council tax will not be increased.
Well, look, the triple lock tax commitment we have made is on income tax, VAT, and national insurance, and corporation tax, which is a different tax, as you know, not an.
So, council tax will be increased then.
No. There's nothing in our manifesto that requires.
Well, why can't you say it won't be increased, Mr. Ashworth? You're a
because we're not going to go. We're not going. I am a plain speaking bloke. You know me well.
I know very well. Yeah.
No. We're not going to go through all of these different taxes in the system because
I'm not asking to go through. I'm asking about council tax.
Because the reality is, there is nothing in our manifesto that requires additional taxes on working people. We've been very clear that income tax, VAT and national insurance will not rise. We are not going to do council tax rebanding, as the Tories are putting it and suggesting. Rachel Reeves has been clear on that today. She has ruled it out.
Well, let's just... You say, presumably this clarity you're saying is coming from her interview in the Financial Times, is it? Is that what you're saying? Where your Shadow Chancellor, when asked about council tax, a revaluation of council tax bands which have not been updated for, as you rightly referenced, decades, and I quote, "It doesn't really matter whether I think it's sensible or not. Is that where I'm going to put my political energy? No." That doesn't mean she's not going to increase them, does it, Mr. Ashworth? So no, I think for the fourth time, I ask you, is council tax going to go up?
Look, I understand what you are driving at. But when it comes to taxation, you cannot make unfunded, unsustainable commitments.
But let's talk about Labour. Let's talk about Labour.
Right?
Yeah. Okay.
Our tax position...
I'm putting it to you that I think council tax is going up, so persuade me that I'm wrong.
There is nothing in our plans which require additional tax increases on working people. That is in our manifesto. The tax changes we will make in our manifesto have been spelled out. We have made a tough decision on the VAT tax break for private schools. I appreciate that is tough, and some of your listeners will be disappointed by that. Mm-hmm. I understand that. We have made a decision to impose a windfall levy on big gas and oil companies.
No,
we have made a decision.
It's the council tax I've been asking about. But okay,
I know, but
all right. Will the fuel
I'm highlighting why we've
and will fuel duty stay frozen?
Again, you'll get the same answer. We've made our commitments on tax, and there is nothing in our plans, nothing in our manifesto which requires additional tax increases.
Right. So fuel duty will stay frozen then.
I'm not the Shadow Chancellor. I'm not writing budgets on live on air as much as you are trying to tempt me to do so. But let's be clear: our plans add up.
Can you lastly address the front page of The Guardian, Mr. Ashworth? Sir Keir Starmer facing renewed pressure to scrap the 2-child benefit limit. Research reveals 250,000 more children will be hit by that policy over the next year alone. Nigel Farage, who of course is the leader of the Reform Party, says we should be encouraging people to have more children, but it would appear that Labour is locked to that policy. Reaction, if you would?
Well, again, we will not make commitments we cannot fund. We will not make commitments that are unaffordable. We've seen what happens when Liz Truss and the Conservatives did that. People pay more on their mortgage. We will have a child poverty strategy in place. But also, in order to relieve hardship and really lift people out of poverty, people need good, well-paid jobs. And that's what we're talking about today, 650,000 extra good, well-paid jobs. So people will be better off with Labour.
So no lift on the 2-child limit?
We can't make commitments that are unfunded.
Since the election was called by the Prime Minister, as the nation has seen more of him and indeed the policies, the poll ratings have gone down. Why do you suppose the nation is so fallen out of love with the Conservatives?
Well, again, everyone follows the polls, so you can't deny them. But the one thing is, my view is that...
I'm asking you why people are turning their back in record
Well, we
numbers.
don't know. We don't know definitively, because it's only once we got the general election that we can form that conclusion. Yeah, we can form judgments. The one thing about the polling at the moment is that I draw one particular lesson from it, which is that... we know that if Labour get the type of majority that these polls suggest that they might, then you have a supermajority, unchecked government, Labour potentially rigging the system in the future. That is a concern. But
you've not answered the question. I say, why have people? Why the more they see Mr. Sunak and his colleagues, the less they like him. The poll ratings go down. That is a fact. That is a fact. Since he called it in May, you're down 2, some down 3 points. You're actually going backwards.
Well, we will see what happens on polling day. I know it's very boring to concentrate on policy arguments. I do think it's perfectly legit, obvs, to have reflections on polls. But my view is polls can help inform a conversation, but they're not the final word. And there is a range of outcomes in the opinion polls, a range of conclusions that you can draw. I don't think you can be definitive. I think it's perfectly, as I say, fair to say, look, it looks as though it's pretty grim out there. And we can engage with that. But we can't be absolutely definitive at this stage because the final whistle hasn't blown.
How many breakfasts is it? Currently, we give 1 in 7. What is the gross figure?
I don't have that figure to hand in terms of the number of breakfasts that it would provide.
Sorry, you're telling me today. I'm sorry. Let me just. So the Labour Party is putting out a policy that every primary school child will have a breakfast, and you don't know how many children we're talking about.
So we've costed it on the basis of
respectfully, I'm not talking about costing. You don't know how many breakfasts have got to be made.
I don't have that figure to hand. No, I'm sorry, because the way we've looked at it is I just don't have that figure.
How do you price if you don't know what it costs? How do you price it?
So the way we priced it is in terms of the number of children. But you don't know the number.
I'm sorry to talk over you. You don't. Yeah. You don't know the number of breakfasts you've got to order, do you?
So we do. We've costed it on the basis of the number of breakfasts available.
What is it?
I just don't have that figure to hand. So we can go around in circles on this.
You'll be aware, and I note that this is from the Independent Schools Organisation. They fear as many as 25% of children could now leave private school and go into state. You know how many school children are educated in private schools in this country, don't you?
So we just don't accept those figures in terms of the proposal that they put. We take the assessment made by the independent Fiscal Studies report that has looked at.
I think you mean the Institute for Fiscal
all
Studies.
All of the figures that have been put in, all of the potential changes that might occur in terms of behavioural effects, and
I wonder if I could ask you,
result being 1.3 to 1.5 million.
Okay, what is the number of? Lastly, I must let you go. What is the number of pupils in private education in this country?
So I know that it's 93% or just over sort of 93% of the school population. Again, I don't have that exact figure to hand right now.
All right, well, I'll help you. It's between 550 and 600,000. If 10% of parents, which I think is small c conservative, you've got 55,000 spare desks in the state sector, have you?
So yes, currently there is a falling birth rate. We currently have 600,000 places free in the state sector.
Back in 2020, you'll be aware Boris Johnson pledged £1 billion for a major schools rebuilding programme that would take 10 years and help build dozens of new schools. We are roughly halfway through. How many new schools have we built?
We've built a couple of hundred new schools already.
200 new schools, not existing schools?
Yeah, free schools, yeah. And we've also built some more special educational needs schools and school places. That's about 60,000 places. Some of those have been annexes and new units on mainstream schools, and some of them have been whole new schools. And some of those are still going through. So we've got a rebuilding program.
So that's 200 new schools. I'm sorry to talk over you, in 4 years.
Free schools. That's from the beginning of 2010. Sorry, I was going back to where you said.
So can I back to 2020? Boris Johnson's programme, £1 billion. How are we doing with that?
Well, what we've done is
there aren't any, are there? It was a handful.
No, there'll be some, but I mean,
how many?
Obviously, I haven't got the figure from 2020. I've got it from 2010.
Is it appropriate for donors to pay for senior members of the government's birthday parties?
Look, as long as things are declared in a proper way and that there's openness and transparency around it so people can judge. I don't begrudge people going to a football match or a pop concert or having a birthday party. It's
paid for by a donor.
Well, it's not paid for by the public purse. We're not using.
Tell you what is paid for by the public purse is the photographer for the Deputy Prime Minister. This is a first. Why does the Deputy Prime Minister need a personal photographer?
Well, my understanding is also to support the work of the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government. And all government departments have comms teams, communications teams to promote the campaigns, the policies and the work of government departments.
But Chancellor, as recently as 2021, when Boris Johnson was in power, Labour described his photographer, hiring of a photographer, and I quote, part of a coterie of vanity photographers. He was a Prime Minister. Your Deputy Prime Minister's got a photographer. Why?
This is to support the work of government.
Well, you've said that, but it's not. You're telling everyone to tighten their belt, aren't you? And yet the DPM can have her own photographer.
Well,
is it when she goes clothes shopping? Is that what it's for?
In my statement in July, I also announced, when I set out some of the difficult decisions, that we were reducing the budget for the Government Communications Department, because I do want to get a grip on public spending. It's why today in my conference speech I'm going to be announcing the appointment of a COVID corruption commissioner, because during the pandemic, friends and donors of the Conservative Party lined their pockets with money because they got on this VIP fast lane for getting contracts.
Lord Alli, the TV tycoon, was given a security pass. He's also been a major donor of the Labour Party. Who authorised that security pass? Was it Sue Gray? Was it Sir Keir Starmer?
Look, I'm not involved in that process. As I understand it, Lord Alli, a well-respected and long-serving Labour peer, had a pass for a few weeks for Downing Street when we first got into government. As I understand it, all rules were followed.
But why can't we know who authorised it?
Well, I'm not involved in that process of issuing passes. I've got every confidence that all rules were followed. As I understand it, Lord Alli no longer has a pass, but did for a few weeks after the election.
For the man who's seeking to restore trust in politics, when he learnt that a Labour millionaire gave him £20,000 for clothes and spectacles, and then was in receipt of one of these security passes, how does that look?
Well, look, it's important there are rules and that there are processes. As I said, Lord Alli is a long-serving and well-respected Labour peer. He had this pass for a number of weeks.
Why can't we know who authorised it, whether it was Sue Gray or whether it was the Prime Minister?
Well, I'm not involved in those processes, Nick, as I'm sure that you would know. But as I understand it, the proper processes were followed, and Lord Alli doesn't have a pass anymore, but he did for a short number of weeks.
Ultimately, would you or would you not seek to have another vote on Brexit?
Nick, I don't think it surprises you to know that we are the most pro-European UK party, and how we felt in 2019 was very strong. So we want to rebuild that relationship with Europe and the European Union.
There would be a vote on Brexit, that, Wendy. I just want to nail that. At some point, there would be a vote on a return to the European Union.
I think the reality is that...
Why won't you say yes or no? I'm so sorry to talk over you.
Brexit was a mistake. Because it's a long term. What we're talking about just now are what are the first steps that we need to take to rebuild our relationship. It's much further down the road before we're thinking and talking about what rejoining the European Union might look like.
So you're going on your first date in this relationship, and then you'll come back for a cup of coffee. Will you ultimately marry? Will you go back into the European Union?
We are a European
You're not going to answer,
party.
Wendy. Why won't you answer me? Why won't you answer me? I don't understand.
But because what we're talking about at the moment, Nick, is about how we repair that broken relationship.
Right. When will the government raise defence spending to the 2.5% of GDP?
Well, we will set out a clear path to 2.5% of GDP. The Chief Secretary of the Treasury yesterday said you'll see that in the spring. And everyone agrees that defence spending must increase.
Sorry, when you see we'll see that in the spring, we'll have the announcement of when it will happen in the spring. Is it just to clarify?
We'll set out the path to spending.
Sorry, you won't set out a path until the spring. What are you doing all day? You've been in since July. You can't set out a path. I'm not saying you... So you won't even say in the spring when it is, will you?
It's not just how much we spend.
No, but you won't, will you, Mr. Healey? We will not suddenly hear, don't worry, we're going to be there in 2029. We're not going to hear that, are we? So we'll have a path. What takes so long?
You'll hear that in the spring, as the Chief Secretary said.
No, my question was, what takes so long?
Well, it's a question of how how much you spend, but how you spend it and how well you spend it. If I said today, look, we'll spend 2.5% of GDP on defence, your next and immediate question would be, well, how will you spend it? That's the purpose of the defence review that we've already launched, that Keir Starmer launched within a fortnight of Labour coming to
So it takes
government.
9 months? I mean, this is almost as long as it takes to have a child. And for the Labour government to work out just the date, it takes you 9 months.
The reason for taking stock of the threats we face, the capabilities we need for the future, is to allow us to deal with this new era of insecurity and make our forces better fit to fight, better able to deter those who would do us harm.
The number of women who die during pregnancy or soon after is at its highest level in 20 years. British infants are more likely to die before their first birthday than in most other developed countries. What does that say about the Conservative stewardship of the NHS? We have waiting lists at an all-time high. We have people now, mothers who possibly will die, or infants who die before they're one. And this is the NHS under the Conservatives, Minister.
Well, if you actually look at the neonatal deaths and stillbirth deaths, they're falling by roughly between 20 and 30%. So the measures that we're putting in are working. We know, for example, that COVID had a significant impact on pregnant mums and on poorer outcomes for babies. Our figures are better than the Labour-run health service in Wales, for example, and they're not putting in any of these measures that I've just talked to you about.
So, for example, number of deaths in 20 years. What are you seeking to defend that? This is shocking. You've referenced the speedy sentencing of someone who I think got 3 years, and the courts are moving at such a pace, and everyone is to be congratulated. But many of my listeners are concerned and have issues. Why do we still don't have any idea of what might happen with those involved in the incident at Manchester Airport on the 23rd of July? What's taking so long there?
Well, that's obviously a matter for Greater Manchester Police to decide what action to take. Sorry, I missed that.
As are some of these matters, Dame Diana. So they can move at pace here. We've now have video evidence of an assault that appears to take place, but involving a number of police officers and a number of young males. It's the 23rd of July. We've more than 2 weeks. Why the delay on that case?
Well, as I say, that is a matter for the police in terms of whether they are going to charge. I know that case is being worked on as we speak.
But Dame Diana, also know Minister, how concerned are you? Because you rightly point to the speed with which the courts have moved here. And I think that's played a part, by the way, in the night that this country enjoyed last night.
Yeah.
You know, we fought back. So how concerned are you that it's taking more than 2 weeks with the Manchester Airport incident?
Well, look, I want the police to be able to act swiftly. I want people arrested and brought before the courts swiftly. Clearly, we've had to deal with the disorder over the last few days, but more generally, the Labour government is absolutely committed, and the Prime Minister is absolutely committed to making sure that people feel safe in this country.
But you're not answering the question,
the rule of law is upheld, and when people commit criminal offences, they are brought to account quickly. Now, can I just say, we are a new government. We are inheriting problems with the court system and the delays.
I'm sorry, you're not inheriting the incident at Manchester Airport. I'm very sorry.
No,
you have inherited a lot of issues with policing.
Yes.
You're absolutely
right.
Sorry,
I do want to say I want them to act. I mean, I know they are looking at that case. Well, that's an operational.
Days.
It is a matter for the police.
I remind you of your 5 pledges or promises from January of last year. If we can focus on the NHS, when you made that pledge, waiting lists were at 7.21 million. Now they're 7.54 million. Prime Minister, they haven't been cut. They've gone up by over 300,000. Why have you failed there?
Yeah, and we haven't made as much progress on NHS waiting lists as I would have liked. This matters to me personally because I come from an NHS family, as we've discussed. My mum was a pharmacist, my dad was a GP, and I wish we had made more progress, but we are now making progress. As we discussed, I think when I was last on your show, the waiting lists have now fallen by around 200,000, and actually what the NHS have said, if it wasn't for industrial action that we had, they would have fallen by almost 500,000 more than that too.
When you asked the Chief Constable of South Yorkshire why there was no exclusion zone around that asylum-seeking hotel, because it was publicised 48 hours in advance, what was the response?
Well, those operational decisions are for police forces.
No, I understand that, Home Secretary, but when you saw that, and you'll be aware that that demo was promoted 48 hours in advance, Why was there no exclusion zone around that hotel? How did the Chief Constable respond to that question, or have you not asked?
So the South Yorkshire Police did deploy additional police officers to the hotel. They were also deploying additional officers to Sheffield at that time as well, where there was other disorder taking place. Now, those deployment decisions are, as you know, ones for the police to make. What they had to deal with in Rotherham was the most appalling crime, setting fire to an asylum hotel, knowing that people were involved and were inside, was truly shocking.
Home Secretary, that was promoted 48 hours in advance. For the third time, why did South Yorkshire Police senior officers not put an exclusion zone around that hotel? Which is, you will be aware as Home Secretary, that is normal standard operating police procedure. Why was that not? When you asked the Chief Constable, how did she reply?
As you know, Nick...
So you've not asked her, have you, Home Secretary?
Nick, hang on. The decisions are operational, and it's my responsibility to make sure that the police have the powers that they need and also the support they need in order to do so. But what they also need to make sure they've got is the operational officers in place and to make sure that they have the ability to arrest and to pursue penalties. So there are issues that the police will need to review about the deployment decisions and where police were deployed to. In a situation where you have changing patterns of threat, changing patterns of disorder, and they need to respond. In practice, what happened in South Yorkshire was that additional officers arrived from West Yorkshire, additional officers arrived from North
but you've
Yorkshire.
Not spoken
and
with
they had
her
additional
yet,
they had additional officers deployed. I have spoken to the Police and Crime Commissioner for South Yorkshire. As you'll know, they were dealing Nick, they were dealing with this very late into last night, and right that they should do so.
I find it extraordinary that the lives of asylum seekers could have been put at risk in a hotel that was identified as the source of a demo, and South Yorks didn't decide to put an exclusion zone. But I find that staggering.
Hang on, Nick. I think the issue in South Yorkshire was making sure they had enough police to be able to respond to the circumstances.
If you'd scarfed off the hotel, you wouldn't have had a problem. How much is it going to cost?
Yeah, I don't have a specific figure for you, Nick, but it will be...
Well, you don't know how much this is going to cost, Secretary of State.
The set-up costs will be less than that £150 million management figure that I was talking about.
But you don't have the actual cost to hand? Or you don't know the cost? Or what is it?
We've got to, there's a way in which we are saving money here as well.
But
because
how much
at the moment...
Saving?
Well, look, it's a really complicated picture because we already subsidise the rail network in this country to the tune of almost £2 billion a year. And then you have got the revenue that is generated by the fares. If you can increase ridership on the railway and revenue goes up, then all of that will play into the sort of commercial realities of the operator that you take in-house into the DFT operator.
How can you be sure it's going to save money if you don't know what it's going to cost?
I know that actually if we can provide a more unified and joined up service through GB Rail, and we haven't set up Great British Railways yet, we will be consulting on exactly what that looks like.
Another consultation. Right, here we go.
We've got to do this properly because we've had 30 years of privatised train companies delivering failure. Delays, cancellations, waste, efficiency, this is a one in a lifetime opportunity to get this right.
It does sound strange. We're going to save money by doing this, but we don't know how much it will cost. I mean, that seems the strangest thing to hear.
So, if we can actually do procurement across all of the currently diverse train operating companies, there are 10 of them. When they come into house, for example, if we're looking at purchasing rolling stock in future, we can look at how we do that more efficiently and in a more value for money way. So that once you actually deal with the fragmentation, there are economies of scale in the procurement decisions that you can then take.
At the moment, all I can say is that Lebanese Hezbollah, backed by Iran, backed by a vile terrorist-sponsoring regime in Tehran, is a net evil in the world, and anything that we do to diminish them is a good thing, whether or not the actions...
So you do support these? You do support the Israeli actions?
I support Israel's right to self-defence, and I'm entirely against Hezbollah's abuse of the Lebanese people. The many, many tens of thousands they murdered in Lebanon and the hundreds of thousands they murdered in Syria stand testament to their crimes.
But do you support these incursions, yes or no?
Look, I'm afraid I can't give you a straight answer for the very...
Why not, Mr Tugendhat?
Because I don't know what their targets are, and until you know what their targets...
I think the Litani River, I would suggest. They probably want to push Hezbollah back to the Litani River.
Well, Nick, look, I respect your position, but their target will not be a geographic one. It'll be a military one. What is that military target? Is it the eradication of rockets that are landing on Tel Aviv, in which case it's a legitimate one, or is it to push the border further north, in which case I would argue that militarily it's not a particularly sound one. So I'm afraid, until I know what the targets are, I can't answer the question.
Are you aware how many private school students have applied to join state schools between June and September?
I've seen various reports in the press, but what I'm also aware of is that during that general election campaign, there was organised activity to encourage parents to register for places that they had no intention of taking up. So the only figure that I would be interested in is what takes place in reality.
Right, well, I mean, we don't need to rely on figures from the press because you're Secretary of State for Education. You'll have the figures to hand. What is the true figure?
So I don't recognise the figure that is being out there in the press.
So you don't recognise 3,000, I hear that, but you're Secretary of State for Education, so you'll have the figure. So what is the true figure?
So what we haven't seen is the movement that others had anticipated or had speculated might happen.
Okay.
I reject the premise that was always there. What we haven't seen movement, but we will of course seek to establish what that figure would be. The trouble that we've had is that parents have been encouraged to register for places they have no intention of taking up. So what we can monitor is where places are taken up rather than simply expressions of interest, because sadly, I think there is some concern that expressions of interest have been made that may not be genuine in motivation.
So what is the real figure, Secretary of State?
I can't provide you with that figure for the reasons that I've just set out, unfortunately.
Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, announced a plan to stop the building of 40 new hospitals, which, quotes, must be as short as possible, close quotes. So she's pausing the building, though.
Well, let me tell you why we're doing a review of the new hospitals programme.
Yeah, but it is paused, isn't it, Secretary of State?
Well, yeah, because some projects are still...
we need a new buildings, but you pause it. Why would that be logical?
Well, two things. Firstly, there are still programmes underway. What happened was I walked in and found the timetable was unrealistic and the money for the programme ran out in March. So we're doing a review on the timing of the new hospitals programme so that I can come forward and be honest with communities. Why would you not want to
build within reason as many as you possibly can? Why would you pause the building of new hospitals?
Well, we're not pausing programmes that are already underway, and we are prioritising those RAC-infested hospitals, but we are doing a review of the timetable for the wider programme, Nick, because the money was due to run out in March and the timetables were unrealistic. So we're not knocking those projects on the head or saying they won't go ahead. What we are doing is reviewing the timetable so I can be honest with communities about how long it will really take to deliver those programmes, and I have to weigh up those priorities against things like the back office and the IT systems and the new medical technology that we need to diagnose earlier and treat faster.
Just lastly on this aspect, Secretary, that is obviously going to bring about a delay.
Well, the delay was already there, Nick, to be clear, because the money was running out in March and the timetable of the previous government was a big work of fiction. And so I'm doing the right thing, which is to come forward with an honest assessment of how long it will take to deliver those projects and working with the Chancellor to make sure it's a programme that is genuinely funded, not pie in the sky, which is what I inherited.
When we talk about genuine funding, some of my listeners express a degree of concern. Why is the government pressing ahead with contribution to overseas climate change of more than £10 billion instead of building new hospitals?
Well, we've got to deal with the challenge of climate change, which is going to cost us a lot more in the longer term. And also we've got to... we have had to make hard choices on this in terms of things like the overseas...
You're funding climate change measures overseas, but not building hospitals for taxpayers here in the UK. How do you justify that?
Well, one of the challenges we've got to face up to if we don't want to see more people washing up on our shores in small boats are the conditions in countries around the world that are leading people to flee, whether that's war and conflict and famine or indeed climate-related migration. So we want to deal with those problems at root source rather than dealing with people washing up on our shores in small boats because they're fleeing those sorts of challenges overseas. And of course, there are also people who are coming here illegally when they should try and use proper routes if they want to come here to work, for example. We're going to tackle that too. In fact, this summer, and I think this was lost in the summer actually with all the riots, but over the course of the summer, we saw some of the largest numbers of deportations of people back to the countries they came from because they shouldn't have been here than we've seen for donkey's years. And so we are being tough on that and doing what we said we would, which is where people are in this country illegally, making sure we're deporting them and putting the resources in to do it.